Hello there, and welcome to A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. In terms of a cultural shift, it's interesting, really, I suppose, as future historians will look at this particular time period where it comes to, the starving artists, the creative spirits, and the way that we interpret and portray creative spirits, because or our attitudes to sort of the way that, say, we look at the 80s and the struggles of the 80s and sort of the pressures and, sort of the Ken Loach of it all. But if you look at this period now, we've reached this strange, zenith, where I have the suspicion that from this point forward, and looking back at this time period, and I hope to some degree going forward, this will be the period where we see sort of, the definition of autonomy in regards to, I think now more than ever, we've created an environment where we tell as many people as possible are encouraged to be whatever they can be. Whether that be, pursue a passion or, try to be as successful as possible. But we are now in an era in sort of Western culture where, there are no longer, or at least not no longer, but broadly speaking, there is this greater sense of, you are not bound by cultural or social expectations, class, wealth. These things are much more fluid than they have been in any other time period. And if you have the right drive, you can be as successful as you want to be. And that's sort of the ideas that are currently being instilled in sort of generationally now. So, of course, we've seen sort of the rise of the influencer generation from that, where, of course, people become successful because, they build platforms and brands on sort of using online, and all it takes is having your own phone, Android, and having a knowledge or skill in beauty or exercise or whatever. The problem, I suppose, we create in that generation is by telling everyone that they can be whatever they want to be, there is this almost personalized grapple between autonomy and responsibility. And I think Wild Rose is definitely the kind of film that portrays a modern representation of that. It's funny, really, because on some level, Wild Rose isn't an extraordinary film. That it's there's something very standard about it. It's a, country, sort of country star story. A sort of, a country musician who wants to follow their dream despite all the sort of social and economic pressures upon their life and sort of their own internal demons also getting in their way as they find their way to success. And were you to set this in, say, Nashville, and the character be a man, it would be an incredibly boring sort of, okay, we've seen this several times over, both in entirely fictionalized stories or biopics like Walk the Line. It's not particularly interesting. But simply by shifting the narrative to a young female character set in Glasgow, it really does change the perspective on it. Especially and the elements are still there that you would find in the more traditionalist sort of older versions of that story, where it's a recent newly released convict. This person also has children, and of course, they have the pressures of trying to stabilize their life, trying not to fall back into old habits, and trying to sort of live up to the expectations of the people around them while still trying to pursue their dream. But the fact that it's a woman means that and the fact that it's, there is this sort of feminist slant on it, just gives it that extra edge to it, where you think, we've seen the deadbeat dad story told time and time and time, ad nauseum, but we've not really seen the quote unquote deadbeat mum story very often. It's not a narrative that we get that has been fully delved into. Especially, you could say there is a sort of misogynistic sort of expectation that, oh well, women, there's no point telling that story because women have like an innate sense of mother-child connection, etc., etc., which is all, of course, a bunch of nonsense. Mostly, I mean, there are many women who probably identify with a character like Rose, who, feels the desire to want to be a free spirit, whilst because of decisions, again, I'm quote unquote decisions she made in her youth, or events that happened outside of her control, there's a lot more expectation on her. And again, the fact that she's a woman with 2 children means that, again, there is that sort of subtextual societal expectation of, oh, you should be looking after your children more than following your passion. And I think that gives it a really interesting slant, because it means that we're having to shift perspectives and shift our biases because of a certain cultural idea of of gender roles. And of course that means when Rose, has her ups and downs, it does stimulate a different sense of empathy. You actually do want to see her succeed musically, but when she's letting her children down, or disappointing her mother, or betraying her friend, there is this almost additional sense of, like heightened, I suppose would be better, a heightened sense of criticism upon her character. Whereas, as I say, if it was set in, and again you have the country aspect, as well. You have the country aspect where you think, well, not only do you have this life completely, this life that already exists and these expectations and responsibilities, you're trying to follow a passion that has nothing really, you have no link to. The idea that, she wants to follow country music, even though she's a Glaswegian girl who wants to go to Nashville. And again, that gives it this additional slant where you think, is this entirely a pipe dream? Is this something where, we've seen the story of someone who believes that if they get to a place, that that everything else in their life will fall in line by just simply arriving at somewhere. And so the idea of this girl who simply believes that if she can get to Nashville, she will become, something will happen for her as a country star. You have that additional sense of what is the nature of this character? Is she entirely a fantasist? Should we be rooting for her? Or is there a certain, delusion in her dreams? And I think that almost enhances the empathy. Because, the one thing that's never put into question is the fact that she is a good musician, or good performer. She has a voice, she has an ability. And it's even posed to her, in the era where we have like TV talent shows and ways that someone who has a good voice can present themselves. They're saying, well, why don't you just go that way? And she makes a clear stance about the fact that she sees herself as a musician who is trying to craft herself rather than someone who's trying to perform for a TV talent show. Trying to perform to just impress sort of mainstream crowds. And like I say, it gives you this rich, complex character whose motives and drives, like I say, are not unique, and yet there is something about her that gives a sense of difference and a different slant, I suppose, on her goals and whether she'll achieve them, and if she achieves them, will they be what she expects? And it works really well in that respect, because it means that the highs are particularly high when she meets Bob Harris. When people actually do believe in her, you actually feel the sort of elation of that success. But when you have moments like the fact that she has this really tense and strained relationship with her children, where she doesn't really know how to relate to them, and there are times when she almost, without saying it, wishes that she didn't have them. You feel that devastation, and there is something heartrending, because she's not a bad person for having those thoughts, and she never expresses them, but they're there, and that she's sort of torn between her desires and her responsibilities. And as I say, that's very modern and contemporary. It's very much in the era where we create an environment where people are told they can be anything and we can do anything, but it means that there is a certain ignorance towards sort of the traditional social responsibilities that people used to have. And I think that's a really interesting narrative, and I think it's a really modern, contemporary narrative, even though there is something about the character that is timeless, and something about the setting and the characters around her, like I say, that are timeless. I mean, you have Julie Walters, who plays her mother, who plays this person who feels this sort of, she's had to bear the brunt of the responsibility where her daughter has failed, and yet, yes, she punishes, or not, maybe not punishes, but she derides her for her failings, but it doesn't mean she doesn't believe in her dream. And then you have, is it Sarah Okaneda? Sophie Okaneda, who plays this sort of middle-class woman that Rosalind works for. And she symbolises someone who is this person who she's been successful to some degree, or at least she's wealthy and seems to, have everything in order, and yet, without saying it, there is a certain disappointment in her life. There's a sense of someone who feels like she didn't live up to her potential, and she channels that potential into Rosalind and sort of champions her, even though there is this sort of tension over the fact that Rosalind is hiding aspects of her life away from this woman. And so, like I say, there is a really nice feminist slant to this, where you look at it and look at these three women, and you just think they represent the shifting ideas generationally of, like I said, the autonomy and responsibility. And although on some level I do think it sort of applies, outside of gender, that there is this struggle in generationally overall, generally speaking, I think there is a certain feminist sort of interpretation of it, and the idea, of a woman trying to pursue her creative passion, and sort of, and sort of the fact that there is a bias against her because of responsibility. And I think that, as I say, it's a really, there's something about it that those layers, even though the story is very straightforward and it's not pushing the boundaries particularly, but it just has this nice character piece. I don't think it entirely succeeds in that, because I do think in focusing on Rosalind, in focusing on Jessie Buckley's character, and again, Jessie Buckley again gives a tremendous performance. I think she is one of the strongest actors of sort of this era, who I think hasn't yet had that huge role that her name is known. Don't get me wrong. She's not an unknown actress, but I do think I'm still waiting for that, crowning role for her. But again, she's such a nuanced performer who can. She is one of those ones that I've talked about previously, who's so strong at internalizing, and you see so much in her face that means so many different things depending on who she's talking to, and what she's trying to suppress and what she's trying to portray. Especially when you get to the sort of last half an hour, and there's this particular sequence that, again, I won't spoil, where it's a lot of her internalizing everything and sort of making decisions without expressing them. And again, someone like Joanna Buckley is a kind of actress who is incredibly strong at that. And I think, I think going forward, as she's already demonstrated in several films how strong she is, but I think going forward, that's the kind of performance I think would be great to see again and again and again. And I do think this is a like I say, for a small, British indie film, it is a good character piece. It's not flawless. It doesn't entirely achieve everything with, I suppose the secondary and tertiary arcs, but it's clearly very focused on our lead, and everything is relating to, other characters and how they affect the lead. And so if it drops other aspects of the story, it's simply because it wants to dedicate its time to Rose. And yeah, I think this is a nice film. There's just something really. I've talked about many rich and complex and scaled films and all these different types, but there's something nice about the simple and straightforward story, and I think this is, and that doesn't mean, as I've said before, simple, not basic. It's, just because it's simple and straightforward doesn't mean there isn't depth and richness to it. It just simply means it is a clear A to B story, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, it's really good. Anyway, thank you for joining me. If you like this video, hit the like button, comment below, and share the video, because there's all help in the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to get notifications of when new videos are uploaded, and check out my back catalogue of over 250 videos. Follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I tweet about TV shows and films, and I share these videos once they're uploaded to YouTube either the day of or the day after. Thank you for joining me. Take care.